December 20th, 1943. 20,000 feet above the North Sea, the morning air cuts like razors through the torn metal of a dying bomber. Second Lieutenant Charles Brown's hands grip the control yoke of a B-17 Flying Fortress that has no right to still be in the sky. Through the shattered nose of the aircraft, wind screams at 60 degrees below zero. His breath comes in ragged gasps. Blood stains his flight suit. The man in the tail gun position is dead. The others, scattered throughout the wreckage that was once Ye Olde Pub, are hanging on by threads. This is the story of a single moment in the frozen skies over Germany. A moment that would haunt two men for 40 years. A moment that proved even in the darkest chapter of human history, humanity itself could still break through. The mission had begun like so many others. Charlie Brown, just 21 years old, from Weston, West Virginia, was flying his first mission as aircraft commander with the 379th Bombardment Group. 10 young men, 12 500-pound bombs. Their target, a Focke-Wulf aircraft factory in Bremen, deep in the heart of Nazi Germany. They called it Purple Heart Corner, the most exposed position in the bomber formation. The spot the German fighters always hit first, but mechanical. Failures had shuffled the formation, moving Brown's crew to the front. Perhaps that saved them. Perhaps it damned them. At 11:30 that morning, the flak began. 88mm cannons opened up from below, sending 20-pound shells tearing through the bomber's stream. Each shell timed to explode at a different altitude, turning the sky into a field of shrapnel and fire. The Ye Olde Pub shuddered. A red flash. The plexiglass nose exploded, ripped away like paper. Engine number 2 died instantly. Another shell punched through the left wing. Engine number 4 spun wildly, threatening to tear the wing clean off. Charlie fought the controls, every muscle burning, every nerve screaming. The command came through the radio: "Drop the bombs." The Flying Fortress kicked as the payload fell away onto the smoking city below. But they weren't out of danger. Not even close. They were still deep over enemy territory, and they'd fallen behind the formation. Alone. Wounded. Barely able to stay aloft on 2 engines. Then the fighters came. Focke-Wulf 190s. Messerschmitt 109s. They came out of the clouds like sharks smelling blood. The lead fighters aimed straight for the cockpit. Charlie did the only thing he could. He turned into them, presenting the smallest target, shortening their firing window. The German pilots weren't expecting that. Their bullets missed. The top turret gunner hit one of the 190s. It banked away, trailing fire. But the others kept coming. From behind, the Messerschmitts closed in. The tail gunner tried to swing his guns around. Nothing. The mechanism had frozen solid. Charlie banked hard. 20mm cannon shells tore through the fuselage, shattering the ball turret glass, severing half the rudder. The tail gunner took a direct hit. He wouldn't be going home. The radio operator called for help. Static. The radio was dead. Men were bleeding, freezing. The single remaining gun hammered back, but it wasn't enough. Another attack. The cockpit took fire. Charlie's oxygen tank ruptured. The bomber tipped left and began to spiral. Charlie's vision went dark. The plane was upside down, plunging toward the city of Oldenburg below. 3,000 feet. 2,000. He came to just in time. Muscles. Screaming, he hauled back on the controls with everything he had. At barely 1,000 feet, close enough to see the rooftops, he pulled out of the dive. But the Ye Olde Pub was finished as a fighting machine. Most of the crew was unconscious or wounded. They were limping along at 135 miles per hour, a sitting duck, and ahead lay the Atlantic Wall, the fortified German coastline, the best anti-aircraft gunners in the world. Charlie told his crew, anyone who wanted to bail out could go. Becoming a prisoner of war was better than what was coming. To a man, they refused. Below, at an airfield near Jever, Germany, a Luftwaffe pilot named Franz Stigler was climbing into the cockpit of his Messerschmitt Bf 109. Franz was 28 years old, a fighter ace with 27 kills. Just one more bomber, and he would earn the Knight's Cross, the highest military honor in Nazi Germany. He'd lost a brother to the war, survived the brutal desert fighting in North Africa, flown under the legendary Adolf Galland in Sicily. He knew what those American bombers had done to Hamburg, to Bremen, reduced them to ash and rubble. But Franz Stigler didn't fight out of hatred. He fought out of duty. His engine roared to life. He climbed into the December sky, hunting for that last kill. And then he saw it. A lone B-17, straggling far behind the others, barely staying airborne. This was it. The Knight's Cross was his. He began his attack run, finger on the trigger, the crippled bomber in his sights. But something stopped him. The bomber's guns weren't firing. He pulled closer, and then he saw. Through the torn metal, through the gaping holes in the fuselage, he could see inside the aircraft. He could see the men, wounded, bleeding, desperately trying to keep their plane in the air. The tail gun was silent, the waist guns destroyed. Only the ball turret remained, and it couldn't elevate high enough to touch him. Franz pulled up alongside the cockpit. Charlie Brown's eyes were fixed ahead, steeling himself for the hell of the Atlantic Wall, when the German fighter appeared right beside him, close enough to see the pilot's face. Franz waved. He pointed down. "Land," he was saying. "Land and surrender. You'll get medical help. You'll survive." Charlie shook his head, and in that moment, Franz Stigler made a choice that would haunt him and save him for the rest of his life. He'd been taught by his commanding officer, Gustav Rödel, back in North Africa. "If I ever see or hear of you shooting at a man in a parachute, I will shoot you myself." To Franz, looking at that shattered bomber, it was the same thing. These men were defenseless, helpless. They were in a parachute, he would say decades later. "I saw them, and I couldn't shoot them down." So instead, he did something extraordinary. He stayed. He flew alongside the crippled B-17 as it approached the Atlantic Wall. German gunners on the ground saw the Messerschmitt, one of their own, flying in formation with the bomber. Not a single gun fired. They assumed it was an escort, a captured aircraft, something official. Franz Stigler was shielding them. They crossed the coastline. The North Sea stretched ahead. The Ye Old Pub was safe. Charlie still didn't understand what had happened. Then Franz pulled up level with the cockpit one last time. He looked at Charlie, and he saluted. Then he banked away and disappeared into the German sky. Charlie Brown stared after him, stunned. The pieces fell into place. That German pilot had just saved their lives. The Ye Old Pub limped across the north. Sea, engines sputtering, and somehow, impossibly, made it to RAF Seething in England. The landing gear barely held. When they shut down the engines, the entire crew sat in silence, unable to believe they were alive. Brown reported what had happened to his commanding officer. High Command heard the story and immediately classified it. No one could know. No medals. No recognition. The mission never happened. the story disappeared into the mists of war. Franz Stiegler landed back in Germany and never spoke a word of what he'd done. If anyone found out, he'd be court-martialed, executed as a traitor. The war ended. Charlie Brown went home to West Virginia, went to college, rejoined the Air Force, worked for the State Department in Laos and Vietnam, eventually retired to Miami as an inventor. Franz Stiegler moved to Canada. In 1953, became a successful businessman, started a new life. But neither man could forget that day in December 1943. In 1986, more than 40 years after the war, Charlie Brown was invited to speak at a reunion of combat pilots in Alabama. Someone asked if he had any memorable missions. He hesitated, and then he told the story of the German pilot who let him go, the one who saluted and flew away. Something clicked. He had to find that man. For 4 years, Charlie searched. U.S. Air Force records, West German archives, nothing. Dead end after dead end. Finally, in desperation, he wrote a letter to a combat pilot newsletter. He described the encounter, the bomber, the salute, the mercy. A few months later, a letter arrived from Canada. I was the one, Franz Stiegler. When they spoke on the phone, Franz described the plane in perfect detail. The damage, the escort, the salute over the North Sea. Everything matched. In 1990, 47 years after that frozen December day, Charlie Brown and Franz Stiegler met face to face. They embraced like brothers from that moment until their deaths in 2008. Within months of each other, they were inseparable. They traveled together, spoke at events together, told their story together. Two men who should have been enemies. Two men who, by all rights, should never have seen each other again. Charlie Brown would say, "I had a reason to live, because of Franz." Franz Stiegler would say, "I didn't think of him as the enemy. I thought of him as a human being who needed help." In 1993, Franz was awarded the Star of Peace. In 2008, Charlie's crew finally received the recognition they deserved, the Silver Star. Charlie himself was awarded the Air Force Cross. When Franz Stiegler died in March 2008, he was 92 years old. Charlie Brown followed him in November. They're buried thousands of miles apart, but their spirits, bound by one moment of impossible mercy over the winter skies of Germany, remain inseparable. Today, a restored B-17 flies in their honor. Repainted as the Ye Old Pub, it tours air shows across America, carrying the story of two warriors who chose humanity over hatred, who proved that even in war, especially in war, honor still matters, compassion still matters, because in the end, Charles Brown and Franz Stiegler taught the world something we desperately need to remember: that the enemy is not always evil, that mercy is not weakness, and that even in our darkest hour, we have the power to choose who we will be. This is their story. The American pilot who searched for 40 years, and the German ace who risked everything to let him live. Brothers in all but blood, heroes in every sense of the word,